So chapter 10, once again, has kind of a similar format to previous chapters that we've seen since chapter 7, with the time label. I don't know what we want to call that. When, in whose reign is this happening and in what year and all that kind of thing. We're kind of starting out with that same thing again. And so most scholars, I would say, 99% of them lump chapter 10 with chapters 11 and 12 and say that chapter 10 is the introduction to chapters 11 and 12. They kind of see chapter 10 as the prelude or introduction or kind of opening salvo, and then chapter 11 has the meat of it, and then chapter 12 is the epilogue, if you will, to this last story. But there are some small group of people who have a different view. They think that chapter 10 is actually connected better with chapter 9 and is a kind of expansion of what happens in chapter 9. And there are several details between the two that make that an unlikely scenario. But, we've certainly been doing weirder things here with talking about how this is connected to this and not this and that type of thing. So I don't think it's possible for us to completely rule that out. And there are certainly some people who are really into it and suggest that that is the accurate way to view it. So as we're reading this, I would encourage you to kind of keep an eye out for that. Do you think, obviously we haven't looked at chapter 11 yet, but what do you think this has in common with chapter 9, or what does it not have in common with chapter 9?
Char, straighten yourself up.
Oh yeah, Char, you're sideways.
Char is sideways.
That's all right. We can just go like this.
Let's see.
So looking at chapter 10, we've got again the time label. This time we're in the 3rd year of King Cyrus of Persia, so he's a real guy. We know about him. We know what year he started, so we can pinpoint this to claiming to take place in the year 537, 536. Interestingly, it is sandwiched in chapters 9 and 11 with time labels related to Darius. Both of those refer to Darius. And Darius is that guy that he's not a king that we know of. He's not a historical figure. He might be a governor of the Babylonian part of the Persian Empire, possibly, but we don't really know who that's supposed to be referring to. So we can't figure out historically how this is supposed to be related to chapter 9 or chapter 11 in terms of time period. There is another issue of strange timing with this chapter, in that Daniel, this is the 3rd year of King Cyrus, and Daniel is still in Babylon. So we've got, he is on the bank of the Tigris River, so he's in Babylon. But why, we might ask, is Daniel still in Babylon? The 70 years of exile that Jeremiah prophesied are over. If we calculate back from the first Babylonian exile, and we kind of say, okay, well, what if Daniel came to Babylon in the first wave of the exile? That would have been in 606, and this is now 536, and so this is 70 years exactly from when Daniel could have been brought to Babylon as a captive. Now, that puts him, he's pretty old at this point. Even if we're very, very conservative and say that he was maybe 10 years old when he was brought to the court and started to be trained up to be a servant to the king, he is now 80 years old. But he's probably even older than that in terms of, the character and how long he's been around. But interestingly, he is still referred to by his Babylonian name. We have that reference to Belteshazzar here, just like we did in the very first chapter when he was originally brought to Babylon and given that name. So I think these little details kind of poke us into asking the question, why are these things still going on? Why hasn't the full restoration of Israel come? And I think that this chapter addresses some of that in some ways. It addresses perhaps a little bit of how we're supposed to understand how prophecy works, how we're supposed to understand how prophets work, how we're supposed to interpret prophets. How do we know? Questions like, how do we know if a prophet is a true prophet of God or a false prophet? How do we know that a prophecy of a particular prophet is valid or not? Besides, obviously, just waiting for it to come true and saying, oh, ha, that was correct. And just acknowledging the reality that sometimes the reality doesn't match up with the expectation or with what it is that we are hoping or the way that we interpret the prophecy in the first place. So those are some things that we can use chapter 10 to explore a little bit today. In addition to that, I'd also like us to talk a little bit about spiritual warfare. It is something that definitely appears in chapter 10 and will continue to appear through chapter 11, but it's not really something that we as Lutherans focus a lot on and understand very much about. And so I just want to say a few things about that at some point this evening, and we can talk a little bit about what spiritual warfare is about and the history of spiritual warfare during this period in the ancient Near East, during the Persian period and after, and then kind of a little bit about how it developed into what certain Christian denominations understand it to be today. So that's kind of the plan for today. Any questions about anything?
I just want to clarify, because I know this is something that we've been trying to hit home with us, is prophecy is addresses the question, why are these things happening? Apocalyptic literature addresses, and then prophecy speaks to the privileged, where apocalyptic literature asks what is happening and addresses the oppressed.
Yes.
Do I have that backwards?
No, so prophecy is for speaking truth to power, and apocalyptic literature is for speaking truth to oppressed people. And today I'm going to start to complicate that a little bit. So I'm glad that we are getting there, because chapter 10 is going to make that a little bit less clear and less easy to distinguish, which is a good thing. Get it out there in the real world. So everybody on board with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Any other questions, comments? Okay, so then let's jump into chapter 10. Chapter 10 has 21 verses. So we could do 3 people reading 7 verses. We could do 10 and 11 or 11 and 10. Or somebody very brave could just read the whole thing. I'd like to do some reading today.
I'll read half of it.
Okay.
Which is how many verses?
10 or 11.
Okay. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel, who was called Belteshazzar. Its message was true, and it concerned a great war. The understanding of the message came to him in a vision. At that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until 3 weeks were over. On the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river Tigris, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen, with a belt of the finest gold around his waist. His body was like chrysolite, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. The men with me did not see it, but such horror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face on the ground. A hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. He said, Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I'm about to speak to you and stand up, for I have now been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood trembling.
Thank you. Some other brave volunteer? Or is this the day,
Sure.
finally, that I have to do the reading?
No. I'll read.
All right, thank you.
Then you bet. Then he said to me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your mind to understand and humble yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. So I left him there with the prince of the kingdom of Persia, and came to make you understand what it is to befall your people in the latter days, for the vision is for the days yet to come. And when he had spoken to me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground and was dumb. And behold, one in the likeness of the sons of men touched my lips. And then I opened my mouth and spoke. And I said to him who stood before me, O my Lord, by reason of the vision, pains have come upon me, and I retain no strength. How can your Lord's servant talk with my Lord? For now no strength remains in me, and no breath is left in me. Again, one having the appearance of a man touched me and strengthened me. And he said, O man greatly beloved, fear not, peace be with you. Be strong and of good courage. And when he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. And then he said, do you know why I have come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I am through with him, lo, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends but by my side against these, except Michael, your prince.
All right. Another crystal clear passage. We're all, Daniel is just full of them. Makes life easy for me. So what stuck out? What questions do you have?
Who's Michael?
That's my question.
Interesting. So in this chapter, we have a reference to this messenger from God that perhaps Daniel recognizes from chapter 9. In chapter 9, he is named as Gabriel. But in chapter 10, he is not named, but he does refer a couple of times to Michael. And again, those names, Gabriel and Michael, Daniel is the only book in the Old Testament that refers to those two messengers of God by name. They don't appear anywhere else in our Bible anyway. They do appear in some of the apocryphal literature. At this time, and when I say this time, I'm referring to the later Persian period, the Greek period, the 165-ish BCE period that we've been talking about with Antiochus IV. During that time, apocalyptic literature was very popular, and the development of this idea of spiritual warfare, of angels and demons fighting cosmic battle, and invisibly above and all around us, started to develop much more robustly than it had previously. So I was hoping that we could talk about some other stuff for a little bit before I have to give you more of me yammering on at you. But since that was your first question, we can talk about spiritual warfare first. So Gabriel and Michael are understood outside of the Bible and some of these other texts as two archangels of God. They are kind of in charge in the spiritual warfare realm. They are kind of generals, general angels who lead. I don't know much about the army or anything like that, but divisions or battalions of angels into battle against the evil enemy that surrounds them. So, but let me back up a little bit and kind of talk a little bit about spiritual warfare from within the Bible and the development of it. So, in the ancient Near East, which of course Israel is part of that area and that culture originally, there is a tradition of the divine council, and this is something that is kind of understood across cultures in this region from very, very early on. And so in some of even the oldest of our Old Testament books, we've got some references to this perhaps. For example, if you look at the book of Job, it talks about I don't know exactly what the terminologies are, but the divine ones are all hanging out, and then Hasatan, the accuser, the adversary, comes in and is in the room with them, or in the on the cloud, or whatever you want to envision. And then God says, "Look at my servant Job and how faithful he is to me. Isn't he wonderful and great?" And then that's when Satan says, "Well, of course he's faithful to you now. He's got everything. You're taking good care of him. Let's take some stuff away and see what happens." And that is the instigating act in the book of Job that causes the entire story to start. There are some places where the divine being speaks and uses plural language. Let us go down, or let us act in this way. And some modern interpreters say, oh, well, that is a clear reference to the Trinity, that God is speaking to the Son and the Spirit in these places. And in terms of our own culture and our own understanding of that and what's going to be helpful for us, I think that makes sense. But originally, what that was referring to was this divine council. And the divine council, from a non-Jewish standpoint, the divine council is always headed by the most powerful warrior deity. And the most powerful deity is always a warrior. And the reason for that is because the main function of the divine council is to keep the powers of chaos at bay, basically to make sure that the way that creation was ordered does not come unraveled, come disordered by the powers of evil and chaos. And so they take turns kind of battling together as a unit, or battling against each other when they get into little tiffs with each other, in turns, for basically the safety of the cosmos and for the safety of humankind. So, and on this council, each nation, each state, each political entity has a, for lack of a better term, a patron god. So the Prince of Persia or the Prince of Greece is not the earthly king, is not an earthly prince. This is referring to the celestial patron of Persia or the celestial patron of Greece. And we don't know a whole, in America, we don't really study a whole lot about these kinds of religions, but it equates a little bit to like our understanding of the Greek gods system. But instead of the gods having their dominions where, like Zeus is the sky and Poseidon is the ocean, instead of that, they each have their own political nation state that they kind of claim as their own. And you can see a lot of this throughout the Old Testament. Even the very first verse of the Bible, and some translations say it this way, but we think of it as, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But it actually says, in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, the world was tohu vavohu is the Hebrew, which is my favorite phrase in all of Hebrew, tohu vavohu, formless and void. And so God doesn't create out of nothing. God creates order out of chaos. God takes this tohu vavohu, this formless and void nothingness, and shapes it into something that means something, that is ordered, that has function, that is stable on some level. But from an ancient Near Eastern perspective, after that, those chaotic forces continue to try to unravel the creation that has been created out of that chaos. And so the deepest danger to us as humans is chaos, because we are creatures of order. We are created out of this chaos, and if chaos takes over, then we cease to exist. So then we have these gods that are raised up to protect us from the powers of chaos, and they are our personal gods for our nation, for our tribe. And then again, we see this tribalism in terms of the God of the Jews. Now, the Jews are a little bit strange because they don't believe necessarily in equal gods beyond their own. They're monotheists, which is highly unusual in their context. So they kind of adapt this a little bit. They still have the idea about this divine council thing, but they believe that God is the most powerful, the warrior deity who runs the council, and all of the others are kind of sub deities, or not even gods maybe, but other types of spiritual celestial beings. So angels or archangels or demons or archdemons and all these other types of things. And so God is at the top. But you can see why then, when the Babylonian captivity occurred, why the idea that God, the God of Israel, could still be powerful is so radical. Because if your patron god is linked to you as a nation, and if the way that you interact with the world is to understand that your success comes from that God, and your failure means that that God is less powerful than the God of your enemy who has defeated you, then that would mean that when Babylon came in, when Nebuchadnezzar attacked Jerusalem and won, that would mean that Babylon's gods are more powerful than Israel's God. And even worse, that the place where you access that God, which is the temple, is destroyed, and the boundaries that reign in that God's power, which is the land of Israel, you're removed from that and taken into exile in this other place. So you can see religiously, theologically, why empires like the Babylonian Empire would, instead of sending in powers to keep the people oppressed within their own homelands, instead they take them out of that because if they believe that that's where the power of their God resides, if they take them away from there, then they don't have to worry about that anymore. So the idea that we see, in these early stories of Daniel and some of the stories that some of the early stories in Jeremiah, you can see how this is a completely new idea, that God isn't gone. God is still accessible. God is here with us in this foreign land. And not only that, but God has access to and power to influence not only God's own people and the way that they behave and the way that they believe, but also has access to influencing these foreign people who are our oppressors. We've got, the story in chapter 1 where God influences the guard, the captain of this group of trainees, so that he will respond favorably to Daniel and his friends when they ask to eat a different diet. And so these ideas are very different and change the idea about how God works and where God works. So from there, this divine council idea continues, but then as time goes on, we start to see more and more of the fighting between and among the different gods, and that makes sense because as tribes become nations and nations become empires, then it's more about the power, more about the land ownership, more about amassing the wealth of other nations, things like that. And so kind of the reflection of what is happening on earth influences the way that we understand how things work on a heavenly plane. So when we get to today, I don't want to say a whole lot about the different strands of this, because they're just, for basically every denomination that heavily weighs on spiritual warfare has a different understanding of how it works and why. Everything from Catholics who do exorcisms of demons, all the way to some of the more fringe evangelical groups that, I don't know if you all remember, gosh, this was probably, well, it was before the coronavirus. So, in the before times, time doesn't matter anymore. In the before times, there was this big news article. I don't know if any of you remember it, but it was huge news. Because the spiritual advisor for, I believe it was Betsy DeVos, the education, the director of it, the Secretary of Education in America, her spiritual advisor made this big speech. And in the speech, she said that she is calling upon God to cause the immediate abortion of all demonic pregnancies. And this doesn't make any sense to anybody outside of her group. First of all, groups like that don't believe in abortion. Second of all, what kind of pregnancies are we talking about? Are we talking about, are we suggesting that there are babies in people's wombs that are demons? We can't, like, none of these words make any sense in the order that she put them in. But it makes complete sense for the people that are in that in-group, because they have this language that they speak to each other that nobody outside of the group can understand, because they understand spiritual warfare. They understand the invisible, literal war that is going on around us and above us all the time, that influences us in ways that we can't possibly comprehend. So like I said, Lutherans don't really buy into much of this. So it's kind of hard to express just how influential this is in these communities. I grew up in a series of very conservative, theologically conservative churches, but even the churches that I grew up in didn't have a heavy spiritual warfare theology. They had some, a little bit, but not nearly like some of these other groups have. And I think, again, we've got, we do have some pros. We do have some kind of reasons why spiritual warfare theology might be compelling. I think again, it provides comfort, kind of in the same way that we were talking about last week with the idea that however perverse it might be, it's easier to believe that I did something wrong and am being punished for it than it is to believe that things that happen to me are completely arbitrary. It's even easier to believe that there is something outside of myself that does have a logical reason for it, that is something that I can understand, that isn't completely random. There's something comforting in that idea that there's a logical source for the events that happen around us, that even if that source is the existence of demonic powers that affect us, at least it's something that we can wrap our brains around to some degree, that we can do something about. Well, if that earthquake was caused by a demon, I can act. I can pray that God would take that demon away. I can, in some groups, some denominations, I can utilize the power of God's name to expel that demon from my life and from the earth for at least a time. And so I can prevent other earthquakes from occurring. So you can see, how that might, again, create a little bit of a perverse feeling of control over your world, if you have this very robust idea about how spiritual warfare works. Another, I think, kind of potential pro on the pro side of this spiritual warfare theology is that if it's taken from the right perspective, it reminds us of how small we are, of how we lack power on any level. The universe is huge, and the more we learn about it through science, the smaller we feel. And I think that there is value in that if, instead of allowing that smallness and that powerlessness to make us feel endless fear and then let that fear turn into anger and hate, we can use that smallness to turn to God and remind ourselves of how much we need God in the face of this overwhelming power of the chaos and evil that surround us. But I think, moving over to the con side of this conversation, I think that it's really easy to take that very fine line and let it turn over. And instead of allowing this idea that there is this cosmic battle going on around us to remind us that we are small and that we need God to protect us and comfort us, that because this is going on around us, I now can take on all this power for myself. And I think that's what happens in a lot of these, especially the fringe evangelicals who have this extremely deep spiritual warfare theology. They make it all about themselves. They pray and they command evil spirits to leave. They call upon the name of powerful forces of God and of Jesus and of others of these beings, Michael and Gabriel and others, to come and do their bidding, just to come and do what it is that they say that they want to have happen. Like the lady who said, I use the power of God and I renounce these demonic pregnancies and I call on them to be simultaneously aborted. Like, that is, I think, the opposite to me of what spiritual warfare is supposed to make us feel. I think we're supposed to feel small. I think we're supposed to feel powerless in the face of this overwhelming power that we can't even fully comprehend. And so that will cause us to turn to God, not look around and say, oh, well, these things exist and therefore I can fight them. I can use God as my tool to make what I want to have happen. So I think that's one of the big dangers. I think another one of the dangers is, I think it also, in an interesting way, removes our own responsibility in a lot of ways for the evil that we see in the world, for the suffering that we see in the world. So if you believe that a human war, an earthly war between two nations is nothing but a side effect of the cosmic battle that's going on in the heavens and invisibly all around us, if you believe that a plague is caused as just a side effect of this cosmic battle, then it's not really that big a deal. If we focus all of our attention on what's happening in the spiritual realm, then the physical world doesn't matter as much. And so it's not important for us to look at, for example, a place like Syria, where children are being bombed, and say, that's not right, we need to do something about that, because it's nothing but just the extras, the overflow of the more important spiritual war that's going on. So it's less important for us to rescue children who are being bombed, and more important for us to tell those children that they aren't Christians and they're going to go to hell if they don't convert to Christianity. So you can see where the lines start to blur and things start to get a little bit more complicated there. So outside of evangelicalism, and especially these more fringe groups, many Christian groups explicitly reject the concept of spiritual warfare completely. So especially the German Lutherans, the German Evangelical Alliance, and remember that evangelical in Germany means Lutheran, not evangelical like we understand it in America. So the German Lutherans say the aggressive attitude and the presumption to fight against evil alongside or even instead of Christ stands in opposition to the spirit of the gospel. So what they're saying there is, if we think that all this, that spirit, that these spirits are around us, these demons and these angels that are invisible are around us and causing us to, act in certain ways and are influencing us, and then we have to turn fight against the demons and battle the demons for ourselves so that we can be clear of them. Aren't we denying the power of the cross? Aren't we suggesting that Christ needs our help, that Christ didn't do everything for us, that Christ cannot do everything for us? And there are even accusing in some places of having people replacing Christ in their own hearts and minds, that they themselves are their own savior, they themselves are their own God who can manipulate the spirit world for their own benefit. And so they reject this idea outright. But, at the same time, we've got this in our Bible. So how do we deal with this? How do we wrestle with this? How do we make meaning out of this? And this isn't the only place that we see this. It's not even just in Apocalypse. This morning, Louisa Manenti said that recently in the women's Bible study on Wednesday mornings, they did a series on the armor of God. So from Ephesians 6, put on the armor of God. Why are we putting on the armor of God? Because we have to battle against these forces of sin and the devil. And so these just side references to these kinds of things. Luther himself believed in demons. I just recently, during Lent, we were supposed to do a series in Sunday school, and we called it the Big Question series, and we picked a different question for each week, and we ended up having to finish that online because we got interrupted in the middle. But the very first week, the question was, is the devil real? And my answer to that question personally is no. I don't believe that the devil is real. I believe that the images of the devil, of demons, of personified evil are our way, and especially in ancient times, the way of understanding those powers. We give it a face, we give it a personality so that we can understand it a little bit better. But fundamentally, I think that evil is something that comes from within myself, and that's where it comes from. I don't think that all negative things are evil. some of these, especially some of these spiritual warfare people would say that like natural disasters are evil. I don't think that they're evil. I think that they are neutral, and that it is up to us to interpret them. And I read something interesting this week. I was not even looking for something about prophecy, but I came across this quote. This writer suggested that prophecy is the judgment of history. So that the events that happen, not the things that we as humans do, but the things that just happen, like natural disasters and the natural consequences of the things that we do, are not in and of themselves good or evil. There is no moral value in an historical event. But what prophecy does is place that moral judgment on it and say, is this good or is this evil? How do we understand this? And I think that's another way of expressing that question that we've been asking. Why is this happening? That we are judging. We are saying, why is this happening? We are saying, what is going on here?
So on
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So on spirit, so to me, spiritual warfare, it's, I'm just making it really simple and basic, that it could be, you could view it on two planes. One is the forces, the heavenly forces, God, the Trinity, the angels, whoever else is involved in the spiritual realm, the forces of good, are on our behalf fighting the forces of evil. We may or may not be directly involved in that, depending on what, whatever the battle is. And then in a personal level, I think that we have spiritual warfare in us, fighting, the sinner fighting, fighting to be the good versus evil in us, I guess. So that's, maybe it's just semantics, but to me, that seems like, kind of a simple way of putting it. And I know you're relating it to this apocalyptic literature, but I don't know.
Yeah, so that is, that's the way that, generally speaking, groups that reject the theology of explicit spiritual warfare, of literal spiritual warfare, that's kind of how they interpret this stuff. They internalize it. They turn it into a kind of personal struggle within yourself, the good in you versus the evil in you, kind of thing. Right. So that's very common. But what we're talking about here, just to make sure that we're clear, is literally there are demons, there are angels, they're literally there.
Right.
They are invisible, so we can't see them, but they impact us all the time. And there are all different kinds of demons, especially. There are, for some of these people, there are octopus demons, and they're called that because they cling to you so tightly and bother you and make you struggle in your life daily, and you have to try to release yourself from them.
Right.
That they call them all, all these different types of metaphors that they come up with for understanding this stuff. I think, though, for all of these different ways of understanding this, and again, there's nothing in the biblical text that forces us to believe in any one particular direction with this. I think it's up to each of us to kind of figure this out for ourselves. But I think, regardless of the level that you're going to go in with this, whether you think that there are, up there somewhere, maybe kind of disconnected to us, there are forces of good and evil, or if it's right here next to me and, oh my gosh, if I could only see all these demons that are surrounding me and trying to hurt me, I would, scream and run away. Or if we believe that it's all just an internal thing and it's, the stories in the Bible are just kind of a personification of that personal struggle within ourselves. I think that there are some things that we can apply to that we can get from the Bible and from this story in particular. And I think that one of those things is that focus on who is important here? And I think that speaks back to that other question that I asked earlier about how do we determine who is a true prophet? I think number one, if that prophet is making it all about himself or herself, most of the time himself, then that is not a true prophet, because a prophet focuses on God and what God is doing. We've got, again, like Daniel has done throughout this book, he shows how this definitely isn't him. That's having this vision. This isn't him that's bringing this information. We've got this description of this incredibly powerful messenger, all these things that are impossible in the real world, with the linen clothes and the belt of gold and his face of lightning and his eyes are like flaming torches, and he's his voice is like the roar of a multitude. How much bigger and higher and mightier than can we make this creature, this image? And then Daniel, he can't even stand on his feet. He falls down and falls into a deep sleep, and he's flat on his face on the ground. So he's making sure, the writer of this is making sure that we know that this message is from God, that the messenger, the human conduit for this is not the point. And so I think that's an important idea for us as we're trying to interpret scripture in general. As we try to figure out how we're going to read the Bible, I think item number one is what you're reading about God, or is it all about me? Because if it's all about me, that's not good news. That's not about God. So I think that we can go in that direction with it. Another one I think has to do with, does it reflect the God that we know? Sorry, did you say something, Judy?
I have a question.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, way back in verse 2,
Yes.
at that time, Daniel mourned for 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Did someone pass away, or was it part of a festival, or it doesn't say he mourned for somebody?
Yeah, that's interesting. So this is kind of the number one easiest place where I would go to argue against that little thing that I mentioned earlier about how this is just a retelling of chapter 9. Because what happened in chapter 9? Daniel prayed, and immediately, while he was still praying, immediately Gabriel appeared to him. Whereas here, Daniel is in mourning for 3 weeks. Now, this is not the same kind of mourning like we do after somebody dies. This is kind of a ritual fasting, ritual prayer period. But this is really interesting, so I'm glad that you brought it up, because the amount of time that Daniel does this is extremely, extremely long. In contrast to this 3-week period that Daniel is fasting, there are 2 examples that I can bring up. The first one is from the book of Esther, when Mordecai finds out that the Jewish people are going to be massacred, that all of them are going to be killed. The Jewish people have a vigil. They fast and keep watch for 3 days in an attempt to ask God to save them and protect them and help them and release them from this horrible fate that they are going to face. 3 days they do that. So that's kind of a big deal, and they spend 3 days begging God to save them from this. And you do that by fasting, literal fasting. You do that by throwing yourself down and covering yourself with ashes and wearing sackcloth, which is really itchy, gross fabric. You do it by shaving your head, perhaps. You do it certainly by giving up a lot of your typical ritual and even hygiene practices. So the thing about the lotions, my translation says, I had not anointed myself at all for 3 full weeks. So there's no using of perfumes or any of the ritual oils that are typically used for the doing of worship practices. and for, frankly, keeping some of that BO away, since they didn't have deodorant and didn't shower all that often at this time. So that was only, this time Daniel's doing this for 3 weeks versus 3 days. Another 3-day fast occurs in the book of Exodus, when the Israelites come up to Mount Sinai and are preparing to encounter God. They fast and pray and prepare themselves spiritually for this encounter with God for only 3 days. So if you are, if you're Daniel, or, if you're the person reading this story and see that Daniel has been doing this for 3 weeks, you're supposed to think, gosh, there must be something serious going on, that he's been begging God for help for 3 weeks, that he's been, giving up his regular life, his regular meals. He's not taking care of his body. He's not participating in the religion as it is normally laid out. And interestingly, in verse 4, there's this really important detail that we completely miss because we don't understand what the culture was. So it says, on the 24th day of the first month. In the first month of the Jewish calendar, that is when the Passover takes place. So what this is saying is Daniel hasn't just been mourning for 3 weeks, which is, whatever, I can't do math, 18 days longer than even the most
21.
important one.
21.
18 days more, because it's 21 days in 3 weeks, and then the 3 days thing for the other stuff. But he also skipped the most important celebratory festival in the Jewish year, Passover. That would be like one of us deciding that there is something wrong in our world that is so bad that we are going to mourn and pray and rip our hair and sit in ashes and do this even through Easter. Completely skip Easter, miss out on Easter, don't celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. Even though that is the most important thing that happens in our entire calendar, this thing is more important. And so whatever it is that this writer is trying to tell us Daniel was worrying about, it was huge, huge. But he doesn't tell us what it was explicitly. So very interesting. But what we do know is, because this is connected to chapter 11, chapter 11 is going to tell us what his problem was. And what his problem was is Antiochus IV and the abomination of desolation, the removal of the appropriate religious observances, the destruction, the desecration of the temple, this intense crisis in the life of the Jewish people in this time. So, does that answer your question, Judy?
Yes.
Is there a significance at the beginning of this chapter that the first verse is in the third person and then it switches to the first person?
Yeah, that's interesting. So that, chapter 9 is also in the first person. So that's another reason why some people think that chapters 9 and 10 go together, because it does talk about, they do talk about that, and maybe somebody inserted that additional timestamp, if you will, after the fact and put it in the third person. But well, I mean, I guess it's kind of hard, because chapter 11 verse 1 says, I stood up to support and strengthen him, but there's not really that intense description of what's actually happening. It's just more of the speech after that. So I guess it's possible that you could make that argument, in terms of the grammar, because they choose the first person versus the third person. But I don't know. I don't know if it's certainly if it's coming out of the mouth of
Significant.
Daniel, it gives it that more direct feeling of, coming directly from the source, if you will. So it gives it that little bit more power. So maybe it has something to do with that.
So are we all going to sleep now?
No,
You could if you want. I figured you were reading. I was looking through to
no.
see if I missed anything.
So did you already mention that the person in white was God, the man in white with the flaming eyes? And
We think that the person in white is Gabriel. That
I
archangel.
missed that. I totally missed that.
So Gabriel's name appears
it's
in
Gabriel.
chapter 9. We
Right. I remember we talked about that.
he identifies himself, or Daniel identifies him as Gabriel because he'd seen him before. In chapter 10, he doesn't identify him as Gabriel, but then Michael is referenced. And just a reminder, I think I said this before, this is the only place in the scriptures that we have as Protestant Christians that reference reference Gabriel or Michael, but they are very common characters in extra biblical writings and apocryphal writings. The Apocrypha is that extra section of items from between the testaments that appears in the Catholic Bible. Bel and the Dragon and the Enochs and the Maccabees and things like that. You think this is bad, then you should try some of that stuff. Lots more apocalypse. Lots more crazy stuff.
So the prince of the Persian kingdom is actually the divine council.
Yes, so the prince of the Persian kingdom is the patron god, the celestial being that represents Persia, that the celestial being Michael and Gabriel are fighting against. Yeah.
So how would you approach someone whose understanding of spiritual warfare almost elevates angels above God in their approach? I mean, they'll talk, let's see, how can I say it? They will speak more about the works of angels than the works of our Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Not being very specific because I can't.
I know what you're talking about.
How can you lovingly talk to someone who has that understanding or that approach or that belief?
Yeah, it's really difficult when somebody is just completely ingrained in a system that is harmful even to themselves, and they don't see that. Certainly, I think it takes deep trust in the relationship before you even start to broach that kind of thing. But if this person or these people are close close friends or family, and you feel like you can have honest conversations together, I think the place that you start with this kind of stuff is you help them to question their own assumptions, not because you're trying to change their minds, but because you're trying to understand where their ideas are coming from, and and kind of as a side, helping them to see where their own ideas are coming from. Because a lot of times people who haven't evaluated their own ideas are often the ones who hold on to them the closest. And I've experienced that in my life with some of my family members who are just adamant about their beliefs, and then they're right and I'm wrong. And the ones that are the most vitriolic about it, it's because they don't have that deep self-reflection that I've had over the years about my own position on things and why I hold it. And so I can hold my positions a lot more lightly because I understand where they come from, and I understand that they can go without taking something away from my identity. So I think, certainly you have to be really careful when you start to broach that kind of thing. But I think if you're in a trusting relationship and they understand that you're just trying to understand, that you can have some of those conversations about, what is it about this that is so powerful to you? What is it about the idea that these angels are capable of X, Y, or Z? That is it supposed to be comforting to you, or is it giving you some kind of personal sense of power because you're connected to them in some way? Or what is it about this that draws you to it so strongly? I want to understand where you're coming from with this, and see if that might lead to a little bit more self-understanding from that person. And then from there, if it's about, well, I just feel it could end up being, I feel like God is too distant. God is something that I can't wrap my head around as easily as I can an angel, because an angel is more like a human, more, in a human brain, but an angel has more power than I do. I feel powerless and I feel like God is distant from me, but an angel is something that's right there. A lot of times people feel that way about saints. They do the same thing with saints, that, oh, well, I can't talk to God. I can't talk to Jesus. They're too great. They're too big. They're too beyond me. But I can talk to Thomas, or I can talk to Mary, or I can talk to, whoever, Joe, the patron saint of shoes or something.
Interesting. Thank you.
So that that might be a helpful way in, but just to not go about it from a, well, I want to talk to you about how this is harmful to you, but I want to talk to you about this because I want to understand you more deeply, and I want to understand why this is important to you, because I don't get it. And that might help to open up some of those layers of self-protection that people who don't have that ability to self-reflect often have around themselves. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Jen.
Oh, I was just going to say, I have a few clients that are in the angel churches. There's angel worshiping going on in Little Reading. And I'm not so clear on if it's earthly angels, like your guardian angel, people that are appointed to be your angel on earth, or is it more of a spiritual kind of like a Holy Spirit kind of an experience? I don't really understand the whole angel thing, but I know that there are people that do worship angels, and that's, they meet, and they are organized.
Yeah, and it's, to me, I think it again is, it's kind of asking the wrong questions of these passages. It's right. I think that these references to this battle between the Prince of Persia and these people, this is the cultural way that the people who wrote this down understood what was happening to them. That their experience, their theological crisis that they are facing with Antiochus IV isn't just about them. It isn't only impacting them, that God is involved too, that God is fighting for them, that they can't see it, but that it's there, that that God is being impacted by this as well. That sense of, you know, even though this is before Jesus, the idea that God feels the impact of evil just as much as we do, you know, brings a comfort, I think. And certainly now, you know, now that we are living on the other side of the life of Christ, it's a lot easier for us to see that as the reality. But I think that, you know, that deep desire for the most powerful being in the universe, not just to have created me and left me to exist, but to love me, to be next to me all the time, to understand how I'm feeling. I think some of that could be seen here, that, you know, if it, and also kind of releases some of the pressure, that it's not just, well, why can't you handle this? Why can't you do better? Why can't you, why don't you have the power to control this? Well, how could I, when it's these huge powers of, you know, primordial chaos that we're fighting against? I can't do anything about that, but somebody can, and somebody is, and that brings me great hope and comfort. And I think if we go too far afield from that, I think that we are kind of bouncing off the surface of the point and not able to get into the deep elements of what this is fundamentally about. I think it's kind of that same thing about the, you know, the prophecy and the apocalypse, and let's get bogged down by the details of what all of this means for the future. I don't care. Tell me why. Tell me why this is happening. Tell me, if there's a God that loves me and that can control everything, why am I suffering? That's what I need to know right now. And I think that this is the place that you go to find those answers, if you are able to kind of clear the path of those cultural trappings. And I think fundamentally, I think that the way that we read our Bible, the way that we interpret the Bible when we read it, has everything to do with what we think is a cultural trapping and what we think is the core of the message. Some churches say that they are biblical literalists, that they believe that the information is right there, right in front of their faces. They don't have to interpret, but that's not true. Everybody interprets. We're just a little bit more honest about the fact that we're interpreting. But that makes it harder, because now we have to figure out what here is part of the culture in which this was written, and the way that we create metaphors to speak about things that we can't understand. You know, I personally am very very conflicted about some of the, you know, the violent images, the battle images, the, you know, put on the armor of God. I don't want to put on the armor of God. I don't like violence. I don't like war. I don't like those images for God and for my role in God's world. When I was a little kid, we sang, you know, I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, that's right. I'm in the Lord's army. But I think those are, you know, those are becoming more challenging to me as I age. And I wonder what would the images be like if we were writing these Bible passages now? Would we still have that battle imagery? Would we still glorify war? Or would we maybe use more motherly images for God, because that represents better to us who God is? And how can we translate that a little bit better in our culture so that we can understand the core of who God is outside of some of those trappings? And can we figure out what is the trapping and what isn't?
Yeah, it makes sense.
But the image of war and conflict certainly spoke to the Jewish people.
Yes, because they were in it all the time, right? They were in that little strip of land, constantly having armies coming through, and that, you know, to them, an army is the power. There is no other power. And that was how it was for centuries for them. You know, this is now 165. This has been going on for 500 years and will continue to go on for another 300 years until finally they all just get thrown out of Palestine entirely by the Romans. Anything else today?
No?
No, but I just read the very last verse. No one supports me against them except Michael, your prince. So that now your prince has a whole different meaning, because Michael is Daniel's prince.
Right.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I'm to tell you what is inscribed in the Book of Truth. So we are going to get to read the contents of the Book of Truth next time.
Truth. Yeah. Yay. I didn't want to go there because I figured that was going to be a lot.
We won't talk about what it is yet, but we will get into it next week. What is in the Book of Truth?
Good. I'm excited.
What is the truth? You can't handle the truth.
True.
Right.
All right. Well, if that is it
I'll
for this
say
week.
that we saw the same movie.
What's that?
We all saw the same movie.
The movie?
Yes, where that line came from.
Ah,
You
yes.
can't handle the truth.
Oh, that's the one with, oh gosh, I know it.
Tom Cruise and Demi Moore, and then the bad guy was
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest guy. Crazy guy.
Jack Nicholson.
Jack Nicholson.
Yes.
That's he's the one that said the line. You can't, A Few Good Men. That was a great movie. A Few Good Men. Oh, wow, I was having a real brain fade for a minute.
All right.
Yeah.
Anybody want to pray us out today?
I will.
All right. Thank you, Jen.
Heavenly Father, we just thank and praise you for the gift of your word, and how we can have this discussion and open and honest and gain wisdom on what's being said on the surface, what's really happening, why is this happening to us. We just ask that you help us to incorporate these words in our lives, and how we can fight the good fight between evil and good, and choose you. We ask for your Holy Spirit to guide us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you all. Another fabulous conversation. We will be back next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.
That channel. Thanks, Katie.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank you, Katie.
Bye-bye.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.